Welcome back to the deep dive. Usually when we jump into a topic, we are just swimming in data.
Oh, absolutely. Drowning in it.
Right. We've got biographies, court records, tweets, you name it. The problem is usually trying to find the signal in all that noise. But today
we have the exact opposite problem.
we really do. Today, we are effectively looking for a ghost.
That's a perfect way to put it.
We are standing at the edge of what feels like a massive historical paradox. We're talking about a man whose name is on, one of the longest-lasting empires in human history.
The Ottoman Empire, a dynasty that stretched across 3 continents, lasted for, over 600 years?
And it fundamentally shaped the modern world, from the Balkans all the way to the Middle East. And yet, if you try to look at the man himself, Osman I, the guy who started it all, he almost vanishes.
It's like looking at a black hole.
Yes, exactly. You can see the massive gravitational pull of the empire he created. You can see the stars and history swirling around it. But the center...
It's dark. It's a fascinating contradiction, isn't it? We're talking about an entity that was still around in 1922.
1922.
It was the superpower of the Eastern Mediterranean for half a millennium. But when historians try to find contemporary records, actual ink on paper from Osman's own lifetime, there is just absolute silence.
I've actually seen it described by that exact phrase, a black hole in history. Is it really that empty?
It really is. We are dealing with what historians call a 100-year gap. The Ottomans, who later became, famous for their obsessive bureaucracy and record keeping.
Right, they wrote everything down.
Everything. But they didn't actually start writing down their own history until the 15th century. That is a full 100 years after Osman died.
That's just wild to think about. It's like us trying to write the definitive biography of a World War I general today, but no one had written anything down since 1918.
Yes.
And all we have are stories told by their great-grandchildren's neighbors.
That is a perfect analogy. And just like those family stories, the narrative changes over 100 years. Everything we think we know is filtered through generations of, oral tradition, campfire legends, and this is the crucial part, later political agendas.
Okay.
The writers in the 1400s had very specific reasons for describing Osman in certain ways, which I'm sure we'll get into.
So our mission today is basically a bit of detective work.
It is.
We have to sift through the myths, and there are some incredibly famous, very romantic myths, to find the actual human being underneath.
Yeah.
We want to understand how a leader of a small, nomadic Turkoman principality, just one among a dozen others in Anatolia.
Yeah, how did he do it?
How did he manage to lay the foundations for a global superpower?
And to do that, we have to look at him not just as a legend, but as a strategist. We have to look at the geography, the frontier dynamics, and the very specific geopolitical mess he was operating in.
Right.
Because while the man himself is a mystery, the context he lived in tells us a huge amount about who he must have been.
Okay, so let's start with the absolute basics, or what should be the basics, his name. Even that seems to be up for debate.
It is. And this is where the detective work starts right off the bat. The standard narrative, the one you'll find in most textbooks, and certainly in Turkey today, is that his name was Osman.
Osman.
Which is the Turkish pronunciation of the Arabic name Uthman.
And that's a heavy hitter of a name in the Islamic world.
Huge. Uthman was the 3rd caliph of Islam, a close companion of the Prophet Muhammad, so the name carries immense religious prestige. It signals that this person is a serious, orthodox Muslim leader.
It places him firmly within that high tradition of Islam.
Exactly.
But the sources, specifically the ones from outside the Ottoman tradition, they suggest something else.
Right. There's a very strong theory among modern historians, particularly those who analyze Byzantine sources, that his birth name was actually something like Ataman or Atman.
Atman, which is Turkish in origin, not Arabic.
Correct. And we have evidence for this. A Byzantine historian, George Pachymeres, is one of the very few contemporary sources we have.
So he was writing during Osman's lifetime.
Yes, he's reporting on these events almost like current news. And Pachymeres consistently spells the name as Atman or Atuman.
That feels really significant. Atman sounds much more, Central Asian, more nomadic.
It does. It might come from the Turkic word at, which means horse, or it could be related to a title, Ataman, meaning a leader. If his name really was Atman, it suggests a figure who was much more rooted in the Turkic, maybe even shamanistic or heterodox traditions of the steppes.
Rather than the orthodox Islamic figure the later empire wanted him to be.
Precisely.
So why the switch? Why does history remember him as Osman?
It's likely a rebranding exercise. As his little principality grew and became more formalized, and as they tried to attract scholars and clerics from the broader Islamic world, adopting the name Osman connected him to that high Islamic tradition.
It gave him a sense of religious authority that a rougher traditional Turkic name might not have carried.
Exactly.
It's almost like a CEO changing their name to sound more corporate and less like a garage startup founder.
That's a great way to put it. He was moving from a tribal chieftain to a sultan in the making. The name needed to fit the ambition.
And there's another layer to this name game I found in the notes. You sometimes see references to him as Osman I.
Yes, Osman the Little. The famous traveler Ibn Battuta, who visited the region a bit later, refers to him that way.
Now, to our ears, calling a king the Little sounds like a bit of an insult.
It does, but in Turkish, the suffix chik is a diminutive. It can be affectionate, but in this context, it was almost certainly a way to distinguish him from Caliph Uthman.
Oh, right, because Caliph Uthman was Uthman the Great.
Exactly. Our protagonist was Osman the Little. It clarifies that while he has this prestigious name, he isn't that Uthman. It's a mark of respect for the Caliph, while still acknowledging the rising power of this new Ottoman leader.
Okay, so we have a name that might be a rebrand. Now let's look at his background, the classic story, the one you see in the TV shows and the later chronicles. It's very Game of Thrones.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Noble lineage, the Kayı tribe, fleeing the Mongols, grand destiny.
Right.
That is the official history. And it was established much, much later. The story goes that the Ottomans belonged to the Kayı tribe, a prestigious branch of the Oghuz Turks. They supposedly fled Central Asia to escape the Mongol invasions, settled in a place called Söğüt under the benevolent permission of the Seljuk Sultan.
And Osman was the direct descendant of noble figures like Suleiman Shah, who supposedly drowned in the Euphrates. It's all very epic.
Very epic, but when you look at the timeline, the math gets a little fuzzy on this, doesn't it?
Very fuzzy.
And many modern experts, well, they view the Kayı tribe connection as a fabrication from the 15th century.
That's a bold claim. Why lie about your tribe? What's the benefit?
Legitimacy. It's all about legitimacy. Think about the 1400s. The Ottomans are now a major power, but they are fighting against other powerful Turkic rivals like the Timurids or the other Anatolian beyliks like the Karamanids.
Okay.
And these rivals had deep, verifiable, noble lineages. The Timurids could claim descent from Genghis Khan. The Ottomans, they were a bit newer on the block.
So it's about keeping up with the Joneses, or the Khans in this case.
Exactly. They needed a pedigree to compete. Claiming descent from the Kayı tribe and even linking their lineage all the way back to Noah gave them a primacy among the Turks. It was a way of saying, we aren't just lucky warlords who grab some land. We have a blood right to rule all of you.
So if he wasn't a prince of the Kayı tribe, who was he? What's the reality?
The reality is probably much grittier. There are conflicting accounts. Some sources link him to a figure named Gündüz Alp. But then you have a historian like Shikari who offers a completely different take.
And what's that?
He claims Osman was a low-born shepherd, a Yurik.
A shepherd who became an emperor. Honestly, that's a much more impressive story than the noble prince narrative.
It certainly speaks to the meritocratic nature of the frontier. Whether he was a shepherd or a minor tribal leader, what matters is that he emerged from the chaos. You have to picture Anatolia in the late 13th century.
It was a disaster zone.
A total disaster zone. The Mongol Ilkhanate had crushed the Seljuk state from the east. Central authority had completely collapsed. It was a Wild West scenario.
And in that power vacuum, a guy with enough charisma, tactical sense, and, luck could rise very, very quickly.
Precisely. He was a leader capable of uniting people. And in that era, nothing united people quite like a good prophecy.
Which means we have to talk about the dream.
We have to talk about the dream. This is the foundational myth of the entire empire.
I feel like every Ottoman child must have learned this in school for centuries.
Well, absolutely. It's the core of their identity. The story takes place when Osman is staying at the home of a holy man, a revered Sufi sheikh named Edebali.
Right. And Osman is in love with Edebali's daughter, but the sheikh is hesitant.
He is. And then Osman has this dream.
Paint the picture for us.
In the dream, Osman sees a full moon rise from the sheik's breast. It travels through the air and then it sinks into Osman's own chest. Then, a massive tree sprouts from Osman's navel. Its branches grow and grow until they cover the entire world. The shade covers mountains and streams, and he sees people drinking from the waters flowing from its roots.
And when he wakes up, Edebali interprets it for him.
He says, "Congratulations, Osman. God has given the imperial office to you and your descendants. And, as a bonus, you can marry my daughter."
It's incredibly convenient. God says I should run the world and marry the girl I like.
It is.
But we need to analyze this not as a bedtime story, but as well as political theology.
Correct. This story appears in the records long, long after Osman was dead. It serves a very specific function. It claims that the Ottoman right to rule comes directly from God. It's not about votes, it's not about noble bloodlines, it's about divine will.
It's a divine mandate, pure and simple.
Yes, but it's also a compact. Notice the imagery in the dream. Shade and water. In the Middle East, in an arid climate, those are the ultimate resources. They represent life, safety, prosperity. So the dream implies that while God grants sovereignty, the ruler has a duty to provide prosperity and justice to his people.
So if the Sultan fails to provide the shade, the mandate is broken.
Exactly. That's the nuance. It's not just, I can do what I want, it's, I am in charge, so I must provide. It bound the dynasty to the welfare of the people, at least in theory. It was the ideological glue that held the state together.
So we have the myth, the noble lineage, the divine dream, but let's switch gears to the reality on the ground.
Yeah.
How did a guy in a tent actually start building a state?
Yeah.
Because as romantic as dreams are, you can't pay soldiers with them, and you can't conquer castles with just a pedigree.
No, you need territory and strategy. And this is where the black hole starts to fill in with some geography. Osman's success was so heavily dictated by exactly where he was sitting on the map. Right. Söğüt. It sounds like a small, dusty town, but strategically, it was perfect. It was located on a hill, so it was defensible. But more importantly, it was right on the edge.
It was what's known as a Eushbilicia marcher lordship.
Exactly. We see that term in European history, too, like the Welsh marches. It implies a border zone that's a bit militarized, a bit lawless.
A frontier.
The ultimate frontier. He was right on the jagged edge between the crumbling Byzantine Empire to the west and the Islamic world to the east. He controlled the mediation point on the road from Constantinople down to Konya. He was close to the Silk Road trade routes.
So he wasn't just a raider tucked away in the mountains, he was a middleman.
A middleman with an incredible advantage. Location, location, location. Being on that border meant he was the first point of contact for trade, but also for war.
And that position allowed him to recruit people.
Massively. If you were a holy warrior, a Ghazi, looking for a fight with the Christians, you went to Osman because he was on the front line. If you were a refugee fleeing the Mongols in the east, you went to Osman because he was as far west as you could possibly go.
Söğüt was like a pressure cooker of talent and desperation.
It really was.
But being on that border didn't just mean constant fighting. I think this is where the holy war narrative gets a bit more complicated. We tend to think of it as Muslims versus Christians, just total war.
Yeah.
But the reality on the ground was different, wasn't it?
Oh, very different. Osman was what we might call a strategist of the frontier. The frontier was a fluid place. People crossed sides all the time. And Osman was incredibly skilled at transcending those tribal and religious lines. He built alliances with anyone who could help him.
The best example of this has to be Kösemal.
A fascinating figure. Kösemal, Michael the Beardless, was a Byzantine governor, a tekfur, of a place called Chermenkia. He was a Christian nobleman.
And he became Osman's closest friend and ally.
That's right. They rode together. They fought together.
That kind of blows the whole uncompromising holy warrior narrative out of the water a little bit. If your best friend and top general is a Byzantine governor.
It complicates it significantly. Later on, Mihal did convert to Islam, and his descendants, the Mihalasularu, became one of the most prominent families in the empire for centuries. But in the beginning, it was just a pragmatic alliance between two border lords who respected each other.
It shows that Osman saw the Byzantines not just as enemies to be destroyed, but as potential partners, sources of intelligence, and eventually subjects.
Exactly.
There's also that great detail about the cheese and butter diplomacy. This is one of my favorite anecdotes because it feels so real, so human.
Yes, this gives us a wonderful glimpse into the daily economic reality of the frontier. You have to remember, Osman's clan was semi-nomadic.
Right.
So in the summer, they would move their herds up to the highlands, the Yella for grazing. In the winter, they'd come down to the valleys.
And moving your entire household up a mountain is a hassle if you have heavy stuff.
Exactly. They couldn't carry all their heavy goods, extra weapons, heavy carpets, metal cookware up the mountain every single summer. So Osman had a kind of handshake agreement with the Byzantine fortress of Beylik.
A Christian fortress.
A Christian fortress. The Turks would leave their heavy belongings inside the castle for safekeeping while they were gone for the summer.
It was basically a storage locker.
a Byzantine storage locker, and in return, when the clan came back in the autumn, they would pay the Byzantine governor in cheese, butter, and carpets.
That implies such a high level of trust. You don't leave your swords and your valuables with your mortal enemy.
It shows that they were neighbors first, enemies second, at least in the beginning. It was a symbiotic relationship. The Byzantines got luxury goods and food. The Turks got security. It tells us that the empire started not with a bang, but with a barter.
But he wasn't just making friends with Byzantines. He was also consolidating power among his own people. We mentioned the dream involving Sheikh Edebali earlier, but that wasn't just a spiritual connection, was it? It was a political marriage.
It was a crucial power move. By marrying Rabia Bala Hatun, the daughter of Sheikh Edebali, Osman wasn't just getting a wife, he was securing an alliance with the Ahyan-Rum.
Okay, we should define that group because they're really important to understanding how society worked back then. Who were the Ahyan-Rum?
Think of them as a brotherhood. It's a mix of a craft guild, a religious order, and a local militia.
Okay.
In a world where the central government had totally collapsed, the Ahyas ran the towns. They set prices in the markets, they provided hospitality to travelers, and they enforced justice. They were the civic structure.
So by marrying into this family, Osman is basically getting the endorsement of the local unions and the church all at the same time.
Exactly. He gained legitimacy and access to a ready-made administrative and military support system. The Ahyas could provide logistics and urban support that a purely nomadic cavalry force simply didn't have.
It turned his group from a band of raiders into a movement.
That's a perfect way to put it.
So let's take stock of his position. He's got the strategic location at Söğüt. He's got the Byzantine ally in Koze Mihal. He's got the religious brotherhoods backing him via marriage. Now, he needs to expand.
And here is the genius of his expansion strategy. He was surrounded by other Turkic beyliks. Some of them, like the Germanids, were much, much more powerful than he was.
Right. Bigger armies, more money.
More prestige. But Osman didn't fight them.
He just ignored the big guys.
He effectively turned his back on them. He focused all of his aggression solely on the infidel, the Byzantines to the west. This is the concept of Gaza, or holy war.
Okay.
By targeting the Byzantines, he achieved two things. First, he avoided getting crushed by his stronger Muslim neighbors. And second, he became a magnet.
A magnet for who?
For freelance warriors. If you were a young Turkic fighter looking for glory and booty, you didn't join the Germanids to fight other Muslims for scraps of land. You joined Osman, the Sword of Islam, to raid the rich Byzantine lands.
It created a snowball effect.
A massive one. The more he raided, the more successful he was, the more recruits showed up at his door.
Which brings us to the first actual date in Osman's life that we can pin down with any certainty. The Battle of Bapheus.
The year is 1302. This is the turning point. Up until this moment, the Byzantine emperor in Constantinople probably viewed Osman as just a nuisance, a border bandit stealing sheep.
Right.
But by 1302, Osman had become a genuine threat to imperial control. Emperor Michael IX and Andronicus II decided they had to crush him.
So they sent a real army,
Yeah.
not just a local garrison?
Correct. They sent an imperial force around 2,000 men, which was a significant number for the time to relieve the city of Nicomedia, which is modern Izmit.
And Osman met them on the plain of Bapheus.
He did.
Yeah.
And against all odds, the nomad chieftain won a decisive victory against the Roman army.
What was the fallout of that win? What did it mean?
It was catastrophic for the Byzantines. They effectively lost control of the entire Bithynian countryside overnight. The local Christian populations panicked. We have accounts of refugees fleeing to the European side of the empire.
Oh.
And for Osman, this was the moment he transitioned from a tribal chief to the head of a state. He had defeated the emperor's men in open battle. He was now a player on the world stage.
And this is where the cheese and butter diplomacy we talked about earlier comes to a pretty violent end, isn't it?
It is.
Because not everyone was happy about Osman's sudden rise to fame.
No. The local Byzantine governors, the Tekfurs, they realized the wind was changing. They realized Osman wasn't just a neighbor anymore, he was a conqueror. And this leads us to the famous story of the Red Wedding, or, well, the plot at Bilecik.
This sounds like it's straight out of a movie. Set the scene for us.
The Tekfurs of Bilecik and Yarhisar, two key fortresses, decide they have to eliminate Osman. The Tekfur of Bilecik is getting married to the daughter of the Tekfur of Yarhisar. They invite Osman to the wedding feast. The plan is to ambush him and kill him while he's celebrating.
So they tried to use the social norms of hospitality against him.
Exactly. But Osman had intelligence, most likely from his friend Köse Mihal, who knew the Byzantine landscape inside and out. So Osman launched a counterplot, a classic Trojan horse maneuver.
I love this detail. How did he pull it off?
Remember how his people used to leave their heavy belongings in the castle before moving to the highlands?
The storage locker deal.
The storage locker deal. Osman sent a message asking to leave his belongings, as usual, before the wedding, claiming he was moving his clan to the pasture. The Tekfur agreed, thinking nothing of it.
But the belongings weren't carpets this time.
No. The loads were filled with weapons, and the women who were accompanying the goods, they were actually 40 of his best soldiers disguised in veils and cloaks.
40 guys in veils infiltrating a Byzantine castle. That's brilliant.
It worked perfectly. While the Tekfurs and their garrison were drunk at the wedding feast outside the walls, Osman's men inside the castle threw off their disguises, seized the gates, and captured the fortress from within.
And at the same time, he ambushed the wedding party itself.
He did. Talk about a dramatic wedding day.
So what was the result?
He captured Bilicik, Yarhisar, and famously, he captured the bride herself, a woman named Halafra.
And in a twist that only seems to happen in history, she doesn't get executed.
No, she converts to Islam, takes the name Nilüfer Hatun, and marries Osman's son, Orhan. She becomes the mother of the next sultan, Murad I, the Valida Sultan, the queen mother.
It's a legendary story, but it highlights Osman's cunning. He wasn't just a brute force commander. He was a trickster, a tactician.
He used their own customs and their own arrogance to defeat them.
After securing these forts, he does something that really signals, I am the boss now. He takes the town of Karakahizar. And what he does there is, well, it's technically very important.
It is. He converts the town church into a mosque. But more importantly, he has the Friday prayer, the Kuba, delivered in his own name.
For listeners who might not know the context, why is that name drop so important?
In Islamic tradition, there are two main symbols of sovereignty: minting your own coins and having your name read in the Friday sermon.
So it's a public declaration of independence.
A complete declaration. By doing this, Osman was saying, I am no longer a vassal to the Seljuks. I am no longer just a tribal leader. I am a sovereign ruler.
He also appointed a Qadi, which is a judge, and a Subashu, a police chief.
Yes. And this shows he wasn't just raiding for loot anymore. He was setting up an administration. He was building a state that could govern, tax, and enforce the law. He was putting down roots.
So he's got the state, he's got the army, now he wants the big prize, the city of Bursa.
Bursa was a different beast entirely. It wasn't a little border fort. It was a major, wealthy, heavily fortified city. Conquering it would change the game completely.
But there was a problem.
There was a big problem. The Ottomans were light cavalry. They were masters of the ambush and the field battle. They didn't have trebuchets, siege towers, or heavy engineers.
So how do you take a massive walled city when you can't knock down the walls?
You starve them out. It's a test of extreme patience. Osman ordered the construction of 2 small forts right outside the gates of Bursa to cut off all supplies, and then he waited.
For how long?
Depending on which source you read, the blockade lasted anywhere from 6 to 9 years.
9 years. That is incredible discipline for a nomadic army. Usually nomads raid and leave. To sit and stare at a wall for 9 years requires a total transformation of your military culture.
It does. It shows that the Ottomans were evolving. But sadly, this is also where we see the physical decline of Osman himself. He doesn't lead this siege from the saddle.
The gout.
Yes. The sources described him suffering severely from gout, a painful inflammation of the joints, often affecting the feet. It's actually described as a genetic ailment of the Ottoman dynasty. Many later sultans suffered terribly from it.
So because of this, Osman couldn't lead the operations physically.
No, he had to entrust the final command to his son, Orhan.
And this brings us to the end of his life. The siege of Bursa culminates in 1326.
It does. And remarkably, it was a surrender, not a slaughter. The Byzantine garrison leader, a man named Saros, saw that no help was coming from Constantinople. The emperor had abandoned them.
So he gave up.
After holding out for years, he surrendered the city. And in a fitting twist reminiscent of Köse Mihal, Saros himself converted to Islam and became an Ottoman official.
There's some debate about the timing of Osman's death relative to this victory, isn't there?
There is. Some administrative records suggest Osman might have died around 1323 or 1324, which is when we start to see Orhan's name appearing on documents as the ruler.
But that's not the story they like to tell.
No, the more romantic tradition, and the one the Ottomans preferred, is that Osman lived just long enough to hear the news of the victory at Bursa.
The dying king holding on for one last win.
Exactly. The story goes that Orhan rushes back to Söğüt, tells his father the city has fallen, and Osman dies happy. His final will was to be buried in Bursa, under the Silver Dome, which was actually a Byzantine monastery within the citadel.
That choice of burial place is really interesting. He didn't want to be buried in his hometown of Söğüt, next to his father. He wanted to be buried in the city he just conquered.
It symbolizes the shift, doesn't it? Söğüt was the nomadic past, Bursa was the imperial future, it was the first true capital of the Ottoman Empire. By being buried there, he was planting his flag for eternity.
And speaking of the future, he had to pick a successor. He had an elder son, Alaeddin, but he picked Orhan. Why?
Alaeddin was described as more passive, perhaps more pious and scholarly, a man of the pen. Orhan was the warrior, the man of action who had led the siege of Bursa, a man of the sword.
On the frontier, surrounded by enemies, you needed a warrior.
You absolutely did.
But it's worth noting that this didn't turn into a civil war, which is what happens in almost every other succession story from this era.
Correct, and that's crucial for their survival. Alaeddin didn't rebel, he accepted the decision. In fact, tradition says he served as Orhan's grand vizier. He basically said, "You lead the armies, I will manage the people."
It set a precedent for stability that allowed the state to survive its infancy.
Without a doubt.
So Osman is gone, but he leaves behind something massive. Let's talk about his legacy. And it starts with a physical object. A sword.
The sword of Osman. This became the equivalent of the coronation crown for the Ottoman Empire. For centuries afterwards, every new sultanate up to the 20th century would go to the tomb of Eyüp in Constantinople and be girded with Osman's sword.
It's not a crown being placed on their head, it's a weapon being strapped to their waist. That sends a very different message.
It does. It says that the sultan is first and foremost a Ghazi, a warrior. The tradition states that Osman was originally girded with this sword of Islam by his father-in-law, Sheikh Edebali.
So it connects the military might directly to that spiritual foundation we talked about earlier?
Exactly. The dream and the sword.
And that dynasty, it's hard to overstate how long it lasted.
35 sultans followed in his line. The name Osman Ottoman persisted for over 600 years. It's one of the most successful dynastic branding exercises in history.
And even after the empire collapsed in the wake of World War I and the family was expelled in 1924, the name stuck.
It did. And the family's still around, you know.
They are.
They are. They were scattered to the U.S., Europe, the Middle East. They were eventually allowed to return to Turkey decades later. But for a long time, the Osmanlı were exiles from the land that was named after them.
When we look back at Osman's personality, trying to see the man through the fog of 700 years, what stands out to you? What kind of person was he?
Historians like Samuel Kafadar have compared him to Romulus, the mythical founder of Rome. He's described as wise and patient. But the key trait for me seems to be his ability to build loyalty.
Right.
He didn't just rule through fear. He attracted people. He was a magnet for talent, whether that was a Byzantine governor, a Sufi mystic, or a wandering warrior. He knew how to use people's strengths.
He was a coalition builder.
Exactly. He understood that to survive on the frontier, you couldn't be an island. You had to be a bridge. He bridged the gap between the nomad and the settled, between the Muslim and the Christian, between the past and the future.
So what does this all mean for us today? We started by calling him a paradox.
I think the lesson of Osman is that history is often made in the margins. He wasn't the sultan of a great established power. He was a guy on a hill in a borderland. But he used that position, the friction between two worlds, to create something new.
He blended the nomadic energy of the Turks with the administrative heritage of the Seljuks and the Byzantines.
Right. It's a blend of luck, being in the right place at the right time in Söğüt, and incredible pragmatism.
And religious fervor. You can't discount the Gaza element. It gave his followers a purpose beyond just loot. It gave them an ideology.
A powerful one.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with a thought. A what if.
There are so many with Osman.
But let's take the Battle of Bapheus in 1302. It was a decisive victory, but it wasn't a sure thing. The Byzantines were a professional imperial army. If the Byzantines had won that battle, if they had crushed this upstart leader then and there,
the Ottoman Empire likely never happens.
It's gone.
The entire map of the modern world changes. No fall of Constantinople in 1453, no Ottoman control of the Balkans or the Middle East, no distinct Turkish identity in Anatolia as we know it today. The Kayı tribe might have just remained a footnote, a small group of nomads who eventually assimilated into someone else's empire.
It's terrifying how fragile history is. One battle on a plain near Nicomedia decided the fate of 3 continents for 6 centuries.
And yet, because of that black hole of records, the man who won that battle remains a ghost. We see the empire, but Osman himself is still standing just out of focus, veiled in his own legend.
That is a perfect place to leave it. A ghost who built an empire. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Osman I.
My pleasure. It was great.
And thank you for listening. We'll see you on the next deep dive.